This is Fintech Chatter, presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. And I'm your host, Dexter Cousins. Today's guest is Phil Thomson, co-founder and co-CEO of Auror Group. Auror enables businesses and the police to prevent and reduce retail crime through their data-driven crime management platform. I talked to Phil about what it means to be a force for good in fintech, and we talk about the New Zealand startup space and why the country is producing world-class fintech. I really enjoyed this chat, and I hope you do too. If you do, please consider leaving us a review, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast player so you won't miss great interviews like this one with Phil. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Hi, Dexter. Good to join you.
Well, it's great to have you on the show, and I've been wanting to, and pretty excited about getting you on ever since I think this was about the end of 2020 when I was chatting to Danny over at Reinventure, and he mentioned you guys, and it was such a fascinating discussion. I just thought I had to share this story and the Auror business with the network and the Fintech Chatter listeners. So do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and who Auror are?
Yeah, Auror is a crime intelligence platform, so helping retailers report, solve and prevent crime. And the way that it works is, let's take a supermarket where there's a whole lot of shoplifting, theft, fraud that occurs, and your store manager will see that occurring, either in person or on video. So we've designed a way to make it really easy for them to report what they're seeing, with the ultimate aim of how do you solve and prevent more crime by using data for good. So looking at the repeat offenders that are, targeting baby formula across Australia, what vehicles they're using, what products they're targeting, and ultimately, helping these retailers be more profitable, and then actually improving the safety outcomes for staff and customers.
Fantastic. I was reading something just the other day where somebody had posted on Twitter about data, and I think I put a comment on theirs. I'm yet to see any business use data for some good. And there you go. You've just kind of corrected me now. So, 24 hours later, I'm going to have to delete that tweet, or at least say, hey, I've now found a business that's doing it. But can you talk us through some of the kind of levels of sophistication that you're actually combating here with Auror?
One of the things that most people assume with shoplifting is that it's the kid stealing the chocolate bar, or it's opportunistic. But through the use of data, what we've actually been able to prove out is it's very organized. So you've got groups of people working together using the same vehicles, and they all steal to order, and they'll hit 5 or 10 supermarkets in a day. They'll be taking that back to a residential house, selling that for drugs or for cash. And then those products are actually being packaged up and shipped off to China, Vietnam, Europe. So it's actually a really sophisticated operation that goes on. And it's this everyday high volume crime that happens in our communities, but it actually links into the much more serious crime and the underbelly of society.
Now, there was something I read on your website where I think the stats were 20% of offenders are responsible for 60% of all of the crimes that you see through the data that you have. What's been some of the kind of success stories that you've had with Auror when it comes to customers and helping them?
Yeah, so it is that 80-20 rule at play. And it's actually 10% of offenders are causing about 60% of the loss.
Right, 10%. Wow.
And then it goes up to the 80-20 pretty accurately right across all the markets we work in, and then actually at a micro level for each retailer that we work with, it's pretty much the same, which is interesting from that. But when you look at the problem itself, so across Australia, it's about $15 million every day is being stolen from our retail stores. So it's a massive drain on the community and on society. what we've been able to do is by harnessing that data and bearing in mind, before we came along, it was mainly, gut decisions being made on what stores were the worst and what was actually going on. They didn't have any data to drive those decisions. So we're able to go, well, rather than, knowing or thinking that you have 100,000 events a year in your stores, who are the top 10 people right now for that particular area that you can actually start to look out for or work with police on? So some of the things that we've seen from a profitability revenue point of view, we're seeing retailers reduce their loss by up to 20%, which is tens of millions of dollars every year. But what's more interesting to us is actually how can you help on the safety side? So there's been an increase in violence and aggression in retail stores, particularly since COVID. It's nearly doubled. So how do you provide the intelligence to your frontline workers to change the way that they interact with their customers, good and bad? So you're creating a safer environment where they don't have to go to work every day, wearing a stab-proof vest and a body camera because it's too dangerous. We think that's frankly, it's unacceptable for society to accept that. Whereas actually, if they know exactly who they should be looking out for because they've done 5 or 10 things across the week prior, they can approach that person and provide them better customer service, actually offer them a basket. So they're not accusing them of being a criminal. They're not trying to tackle the person when they leave the store. They're actually just going up to them and saying, hello, how can I help you today? And that's changing that customer experience for the better. And so, we're seeing a massive reduction in those health and safety incidents actually occurring. There's a lot of threatening behavior going on, but thankfully actually having a way to log what's happened in those stores provides an opportunity for that store manager or security guard to do something about it, but without putting themselves in harm's way.
Yeah, well, funny you mentioned that, Phil, because I've just moved to a new kind of town recently, and everybody's been so friendly when I've gone in the shops. So I wonder if they're using more.
I'm sure it's just a friendly town, Dexter, don't you worry.
But it's fascinating to hear that the depth of the problem. I mean, as you mentioned, you just assume that it's kids stealing chocolate bars, or it's drug addicts who just desperate to kind of get a little bit of money. But this is really sophisticated stuff. So how does the Auror system work, and how does the network kind of work so that you can support your customers?
Yeah, so at its most basic level, it's about inputting information of what's happened in a store. So you have that shoplifting event. The store manager can enter in what's occurred, who was involved, what products were taken. And we've built it in a really structured way so that you've got good quality data. And then it's also taken that consumer grade user experience and user interface design and applying it to the enterprise, which frankly, they're not quite used to how easy it is. But our thing is actually you shouldn't have to train people on technology these days. Yeah. Yes, there's a change management process, but actually making it really easy for them. And what we've proven by doing that is you get 3 times as much data as previously.
Right.
So when you've got that in one place, then you can start making the connections through the platform on who those people are, for instance, so you can actually have that insight. So flipping it from just having thousands of incidents to them being more people-driven, right. Which allows them to make those better decisions ultimately on the back of that. And then you can also link in with other technologies in stores. So, there's a lot of things like computer vision on self-checkouts going in, which is great at detecting, a potential fraudulent event. But isn't great at then doing the investigation or the workflow off the back of that. So you can start getting some automatic data coming in. And then on the output side, you've also got technologies like license plate recognition being used. So actually when the car pulls into the car park, how do you pair that notification with intelligence to say, Dexter's actually just arrived at your car park and he's been involved in 3 incidents and has carried a weapon. So it changes again the way that they then approach I'm sure it's not your car, but then also they can use that same technology to also provide your click and collect or your pickup services as well on the positive customer side. So it's putting the infrastructure, which we don't do, we just connect into it, and making the whole process really seamless.
Fantastic. Now, how did you get the idea for this off the ground? Because it's just, as I mentioned at the beginning, when Danny told me about it, I was just like, wow, this is like, why has nobody thought of this before? And it's I imagine it's such a huge business opportunity that's untapped. Like, it's such an untapped market.
Yeah, funnily enough, we saw an article in the paper around how much it was costing retailers here in New Zealand, if you can't tell by the accent where we started. It was $2 million a day here, 15 in Australia, and worldwide it's about $150 billion every year. And we actually didn't believe it. So, I was working at a law firm doing IP and privacy law. My co-founder Tom was at Deloitte Management Consultant, and James, the other co-founder, was at Xero Accounting, being a developer there. So we sort of got together and went out and spoke to some retailers. And yes, there was this big financial problem, but it also touched on the health and safety, on the customer experience. And then from my point of view, just looking at the way they're collecting data and storing it and sharing it, there's a whole lot of privacy implications. And I was like, how do you actually change that again for the better, and make it a safe way so they weren't, they're using WhatsApp and Facebook groups to share information across the community with no controls in place. And I think what we sort of saw at the time, this is 2012, 2013, this is the genesis, it's almost like the world had ignored physical retail, particularly in the security and crime space, where everything was online, e-com, cyber fraud, all the new cool stuff. And it's almost like this problem has just been forgotten. And the fact that retailers were losing 2% of their revenue was just a cost of business. So we thought it was a pretty interesting place to start. And when we looked across the world, no one was actually looking at this particular problem in the way that we were, and then bring in police on the other side of the network being an important part of how do you fight crime.
So you've got a connection with a police force as well, then?
Yeah, we do. So we've built it in a way that retailers A, B, and C are all on the platform. They've got their own source of their own data, but we can actually aggregate that across the industry. So you start getting these new views of what's actually occurring. They can then invite in their local police officer to the platform, who then has exposure to all of those retailers on the platform. And there's ways that they can share information securely within it, across retail and then also with police. So what we ended up doing is, part of the problem that we saw wasn't just on the retail side, but actually on the police side, it was so difficult for them to deal with this low level, high volume crime. And they were being resource constrained as well. And from a public society point of view, you'd probably rather them out there solving the more serious crimes than looking into, what on the face of it as a small shoplifting event. So there's almost a perfect storm that we saw the opportunity to digitize the way that crime was reported to police, and that entire collaboration. So actually, why can't you upload your video evidence and witness statement that the police can download at the click of a button? They were sending out 2 cops in a car for 2 or 3 hours to go and pick this up from a store. So we allowed the police to come onto the network for free. They actually engage directly and collaborate with the retailers, and it builds out that network from there.
Brilliant. So it's almost like a 2-sided marketplace model, but just as a force for good and combating crime.
100%. And then there's layers of networks within there as well, because you've got within the retail stores, across the retailers, and then with police as well, and even actually across the police jurisdictions. You've got 7 or 8 police forces in Australia. They often all have their own systems as well, and people are going across state to steal.
So I'd love to have a chat with you a bit more, Phil, about the actual journey that you've been on with Auror. You mentioned there a little bit about some of the founders and your background, but what was it like to kind of take that plunge of, having an idea and then actually quitting the job and getting started with it?
Yeah, I was probably 4 years into a big four law firm career. And what I saw was that for the next 7 to 10 years of my life, I'd be doing the same thing day in, day out. And look, I didn't hate it, but I just thought it was a great opportunity while I was still young to try something different. And when this sort of idea came up, I thought it'd be a cool thing to look into. And then the more we dug into the problem, the more exciting and interesting it got. And it was certainly more interesting than just being a regular lawyer day in, day out. So it started by nights and weekends, as you typically do. And then we decided when we had a first customer that was interested, we quit our jobs and jumped into it full time, bootstrapping our way, not paying ourselves anything until we raised a bit of capital. But that was sort of how we got started. And it's crazy that sort of 8 years has gone by since I quit my job. But I feel like I'm only at the next stage now of the company. It's even more exciting going forward. That's
awesome. Now, you mentioned there about kind of bootstrapping initially. What was the point that you kind of realized that you then maybe had to go out and raise capital to take the business to the next level?
I think one, we weren't paying ourselves, so it was a good motivator to actually try and find some money. But the catalyst was actually we got Woolworths New Zealand interested in doing a pilot, which was successful. So we thought there was a good chance to raise money off the back of having your first customer. Bearing in mind it's only a couple of stores to start with. But we also knew that we needed to start building a team around us, particularly on the technology side. So we needed to have a bit of startup capital to do that. And it was probably a tough part of the Australasian funding scene back in early 2014, where there wasn't a lot of capital around, and the capital that you did get was small and with low valuation. So it had a lot of unfortunate consequences for us throughout the journey, I think. But at the same time, without the initial capital, it would have been hard to get where we are today. So that was the initial bit of funding, was a couple of $100,000 from just local friends and family, pretty much. And then about a year later, we approached Reinventure, which is a pretty interesting approach from a non-fintech company initially to them.
Yeah, look, I've spoken about this a lot. I think if you look, kind of back then, it would have seemed really odd. But I think now in 2021, the boundaries have really blurred, right, as to what is fintech and what is the purpose of it and what are we there to do. And I think the more that you look at the Reinventure portfolio, the more that it makes a lot of sense, right? The businesses that they've got in that, where everything's interconnected and everything kind of plugs and plays into each other as well.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a funny story. When we reached out to Danny initially, we saw an article. It always starts with an article in the paper, right? But we saw an article about their new fund, and we thought it was interesting having a name like Westpac Australia behind us with being an enterprise company. There was that trust and credibility opportunity with partnering with them. So we did a cold reach out to Danny and somehow figured out that we had a mutual connection, and they said, look, we're looking to be in Sydney, next week. Are you free to catch up? So he said yes. We then promptly booked plane tickets and jumped on the plane. And we went and saw him, and he sort of laid out the initial thesis, which was around, being fintech focused, being a, second time plus founder, and then doing sort of fast follow opportunities from across the world that have been proven to work. And we're sitting there going, well, we're none of these things. But Tom, my co-founder, bless him, just completely ignored it and launched into what we're doing while we're doing it. And it's only a few years later, talking to Danny about that story, he mentioned that the thing that was going through his head was not, why can't it work? His whole thesis was, well, what if it does work? Can we actually change the way that we deal with crime in the community? What impact will that have on the world? Which I absolutely love. And so probably against his initial judgments of what they're looking for, took a bit of a punt on us. And, 5 or 6 years later, we actually have built an online payment experience for our service station customers. So we can probably classify ourselves as part fintech now, But definitely back in the day, it was a lot of sideways looks of who is this black sheep of the family, one from New Zealand and two not fintech.
Yeah.
But I think being part of that portfolio, we learned a lot from those other companies who were more advanced than us in a number of those areas.
Well, mate, it's you Kiwis. You're just challenging everybody's assumptions, because Xero is a fintech as well, right? They're doing accounting software. So where's the business at now? So you're what, 8 years into the journey? Kind of how many people is the business, Phil?
We're at 60 people as of this week. So we've been, in the last 12 months, we've doubled the team size. We've gone from four stores in West Auckland, New Zealand, into about just over 10,000 now across the world.
Wow.
So we've got offices in Auckland, Melbourne, and now Denver, Colorado as well. So the big focus for us is pushing into the US market.
Brilliant. And in terms of your clients, any kind of big names or big wins that you've had so far?
Yeah, we actually work with probably 80% of the New Zealand retail market. And in Australia, we work with Coles, Woolworths, Bunnings, and all the majors. So, across them, that's where it's really interesting to see the same challenges that they've been facing for years. And no one's been doing what we're doing. So it's been a chance for us to, one, educate them on what we're doing and how it can be different for how they work. And then secondly, how to then use the ways of scaling into a new market like Australia for us has always been similar, on a small scale to the US, which is the home of retail and home of law enforcement. So, we've just signed up a couple of new logo customers in the US that hopefully we'll be able to announce in the next few months. Which will be a game changer for us again.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm getting concerned here because the 3 stores that you mentioned were the 3 friendliest that I went to. Coles, Woolies and Bunnings. Are you sure there's nothing on mistaken identity here?
If you look at those sort of 3 organizations as a whole, they account for nearly 50% of total retail spend between them. So if you start looking at what 2% of that is, it's a massive number.
Yeah.
On the financial side, that just literally goes walking out the door every day.
Yeah, it's huge. Now you kind of talked a little bit earlier about your background, and I guess look, you what 5 years experience before you decided to launch your own business. I guess one of the challenges that we always see for founders is the leadership perspective, particularly if you haven't had a lot of experience in business before. How have you found that journey of going from a few people to 60 people, and what are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way, Phil?
There's a lot of good and there's a lot of challenges that I think will ultimately be good for us. And I think what's exciting about the stage we're at now is that we've got super smart people around us who can probably do things better than we can, and they really level you up. So I think that's what's cool about being becoming a larger company, is that you can actually get more people doing more good things. But definitely scaling it and being a first-time founder, you learn a lot of hard lessons, particularly around how do you hire the right people? Are they going to work out for you? How do you have hard conversations, which I think most founders aren't particularly good at, myself included. And it's a really learned skill around how do you lean into those conversations with people. Most of the time, issues in businesses are with people.
Yeah.
To actually just have that conversation, because it's always going to be there lurking in the background until you have it. And the faster you have it, actually, the better the outcome normally is.
What when you are hiring, what are some of the qualities that you look for in people that you think, hey, this is an indicator for success in our organization?
I think now, looking back at what we've done right and what we could have done better, is definitely finding someone who is smart and a generalist. I think when you're a small growing company, people that can actually change what they're doing and upskill with you is important. And then also someone that's actually can do the work. So it's no point bringing in, someone who's been at a 500-person company and needs to have a team of 10 people to do anything. At the early stage, they need to be proactive and just look into how they help out. I think the lesson that we learned was what does good actually look like?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that you don't know until you really see it.
Yeah.
And so for us, that was probably 3 or 4 years in, and probably the halfway mark of the company and away from where we are now, where we had a consultant or a sort of advisor come in, and he said, "Here, I'm going to look at the US market for you and do some go-to-market thinking." And within one day, he'd come back with a presentation on what it looks like and his thoughts and ideas. And we're expecting that would have taken 4 weeks. And that was the time we went, that's an A player.
Yeah.
And from that point forward, we changed our thinking completely around who we needed to hire and what that bar looked like.
Yeah.
And there's also just back to that, the issue with not taking enough funding early on meant that we're often hamstrung by going, we can't actually hire the best people because we couldn't afford it, or making the classic mistake of, we could hire 3 people for the price of 1.
Yeah.
3 people are going to be better. Whereas obviously it's just not the case. The biggest lesson for us is around, who do you look out for? And it's really hard to test some of those things until they're actually in the company. But you get a feeling for it, I think, in interviews now around how they answer questions and being smart and deliberate around how you structure that entire process, I think, is important to find the right people.
Yeah. Obviously there's a compelling reason to join the business just because of what you're doing and the problem that you're solving. But what are some of the kind of other reasons that people typically enjoy kind of working at Auror and enjoy kind of being part of the journey?
Yeah, that mission is really a big thing for a lot of the team, and doing good for the community, actually applying technology in the right way to help out, I think is important. And then we've put a lot of focus on the culture, and that was quite deliberate from very early on. It's actually a lesson I learned from being at a big law firm where they did it in the wrong way. One day we just saw these new values appear next to the photocopier. And that was their idea of, culture and explaining what they never even explained what the values meant. They were just up one day. And I got really confused and concerned. I went to the head of HR and I said, "Great, you've put up these new values, but why is people first the third value? Shouldn't it be the first?"
Yeah.
And they had absolutely no answer for us. So we took that lesson, the lessons of being in a big corporate, of what we didn't want to do. And so it became important for us early on to design our culture, because we knew that culture takes on a form regardless of the, what the team looks like. And so we built that from effectively day one around what we wanted to be. And then over time, we've refined that around having the right guiding principles. And probably about 18 months ago, we actually changed them because the business had changed. We'd got to a stage where the classic things like run fast and make things happen was actually providing a disservice to us as a company, because we needed to be ensuring we did things in the right way. We're working with large customers, we're working with sensitive information. So we changed it to be deliberate. So, you can go fast, but you need to make sure that you've thought through why you're doing it and what the outcomes and issues could be. And for the team, I think we talk about culture add, not culture fit. So every time that we have a new person join the team, what are they bringing that will actually, increase the value of that culture? And then for us, diversity is a massive thing as part of culture. How do we ensure we have a diverse team that represents the communities that we're building software for, and that the software may have an impact on? And if we don't have the right diversity across the team, then we'll end up building the wrong things or making the wrong decisions that will have consequences.
Yeah, I love all of the things that you've mentioned there, Phil, and just those kind of little kind of distinctions of the nuance of a word that's chosen. And I kind of, one of the biggest frustrations that I have is, people talking about this thing about, fail fast and all this stuff. I say, why are you talking about failing, right? Talk about being successful, talk about being deliberate, and those things. People get caught up in these narratives, and it really, to me, it sends out the kind of wrong messaging to your people. And, that distinction around people, we see so many businesses talk about their customers and talk about their people as if they're two different kind of species or something. It's but your customers are your people, right? Your people are your customers, and so I think when you've got that you're making those distinctions, it makes it very clear to people about where the boundaries lie, and therefore when you've got those difficult situations and discussions that you're talking about, it's not that it makes it easier, but at least it gives a framework to say, hey, here's the kind of boundaries we've got. Everybody knows where where we're playing. You've stepped the boundary. Here are the consequences that that come with that.
Definitely. And the one thing that we were very conscious of is not just having values written on a wall. How do you live and breathe them? And what we're really proud of, I think, is that both the old principles, but also the new ones, they're actually used in everyday language within the company itself. So it's the code of being able to share an opinion. And actually a good one that we learned from was strong opinions loosely held. So we wanted people to share their opinions, but not be stuck wed with them. And that worked really well to a point. And then when we were discussing how we can evolve them, feedback we got from some people was it's great as a thought, but actually it lends itself to the loudest person in the room is always giving their opinions.
Yeah.
So how do we change that around? And actually, particularly for underrepresented groups or marginalized groups that often don't feel they can share their opinion, how do you change that around? So we amended that to seek perspectives and solve problems. So the loudest person in the room, while they can share their opinion, they should be looking to try and be an ally and help others, elicit that opinion from others instead.
Yeah.
And you get to a better outcome. But we also have people, as when they're sharing their opinion, they can just say, hey, my strong opinion loosely held is, which becomes a flag to saying, I might be a dissenting voice in the room, but don't take that out on the messenger.
Yeah.
And it's really meant that we can have these open, transparent conversations and get to the right outcome, based on the fact that there's this shared responsibility across the company of getting to the right outcome, but allowing everyone to have their voice in.
Fantastic. Now, you've got the honor of being the first New Zealand Fintech we've had on the show in over 100 episodes, which is kind of a little bit startling because what New Zealand's doing, I think, is kind of going a little bit kind of under the radar. But what I usually ask people, Phil, at this stage is which fintech has got you most excited and why? And what I thought would be cool would be maybe if you could share with our listeners some of the stuff that you're seeing in New Zealand and who's kind of up and coming there and we should be keeping an eye out on.
Well, firstly, very honoured, Dexter, to be the first Kiwi company flying the flag. And I think in the fintech space, there's some interesting stuff coming out of a company called Jude, which is looking at open banking. On the non-fintech side, there's a cool company called Celo, C-E-L-O, which is looking at communication within hospitals, replacing WhatsApp for them. And then more on the Australian side, but I mean, we love the guys at Valiant Finance, Richie and Alex, part of the Reinventure portfolio, very sharp minds and great conversationalists. So we the benefit of being part of Reinventure is we've had good exposure to that Australian startup scene as well. And it's just cool seeing, Australasian companies going global and being part of it and actually being able to share war stories and talking with other founders about what goes right, what goes wrong, and how we learn from each other.
And what's your kind of general sense as to where New Zealand's at right now in terms of fintech innovation?
I think it's really promising. We're probably a step or two behind Australia in the VC space, but there's a lot more money now coming in to New Zealand, and you do have Blackbird, set up an office here. You've got Airtree, Folklore, Reinventure, all making investments in New Zealand. So I think the VC thing is helping bring startups through. What I love most about New Zealand being an incubator is, one, we're so small that we have to go global. So there's always that mentality of global from day one, where sometimes when you talk to a few Australian companies, they've got a big enough market in Australia. They're not necessarily thinking about, how can they scale to another country? Whereas in New Zealand, you go, hey, it's a great test market. We'll try things out. But ultimately, we know we need to go into Australia, US, UK, and further afield. So I think it's a good mentality for us to have. And I think that puts us in good stead. And then I think the other benefit of New Zealand, which I think Australia has as well, but not to the same degree, where, again, we're so small, you can pick up the phone and you'll know someone that knows someone. So when we first got in front of Woolworths New Zealand, we rang the reception of Countdown supermarkets and just asked to be put through to the loss prevention manager for the country. And they say, no worries, hold the line and we'll put you through. And most of our New Zealand customers we had the opportunity of actually talking to the CEO directly because of someone that knows someone. So I think those are New Zealand's advantages of creating new companies and then taking them to the world, which is probably hard to replicate elsewhere.
Well, Phil, I've got to say, I've really enjoyed this 35 minutes or so chatting to you. It's just such an awesome story. And, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, to be able to showcase a business that actually is being a force for good makes me feel really good. What can we expect from Auror over this next 12 months?
Yeah, there's a few things coming out for us. As I mentioned, our big push is into North America. So the US is where our focus is both from a team point of view, but also from a customer point of view. So look out for a few announcements there. And also eyeing on the capital raising side, we're going to market at the moment to see where we can get more money and advice to help put the foot down. We've spent a lot of time focusing on product market fit and building out the product, and now we're revving up the sales engine and the marketing engine. So we're really pumped around building out the team and building out customers on this side. So watch this space. Mate,
I'm watching it. I think this could be one of the greatest ANZ exports, and hopefully you'll replicate the other huge NZ Fintech in Zero.
Would love to. I mean, that's the benefit again of being in New Zealand is that we've now got some new companies coming through, and that advice and experience from those other large companies getting feedback through the ecosystem. So it's exciting times.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up today's show. Thanks so much for joining me, Phil. Where can people find out more about Auror?
We're all over LinkedIn. Just search for Auror, which is AUROR, or Twitter and Instagram is @AurorHQ, AURORHQ.
And you can find me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn and Twitter. This has been Fintech Chatter Podcast. Thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a review so I can bring on more great guests like Phil. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 people, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you launch, scale, and innovate by delivering world-class talent. And you can find out more at tier1people.com. Until the next episode, stay safe